In July of 1518, a woman named Frau Trophäa stepped into a narrow street in Strasbourg and began to dance. She hadn't planned to. There was no music, no celebration. She just started moving, and she couldn't stop. By the end of the first week, 34 people had joined her. By the end of the month, over 400 people were dancing in the streets of Strasbourg, some for days at a time, some until their feet bled. And at the height of the outbreak, historians estimate as many as 15 people a day were dying from exhaustion, heart attacks, and strokes. This was not a myth. This was not a legend. Every detail is documented in civic records, church logs, and physician accounts from the city of Strasbourg. The dancing plague of 1518 is one of the most thoroughly recorded mass hysteria events in human history, and we still don't fully understand what caused it. That phrase, mass hysteria, gets thrown around a lot, and it usually ends the conversation, as if labeling something hysteria is the same as explaining it. It isn't. What actually happened in Strasbourg in the summer of 1518 is a story about how extreme psychological stress can produce real, physical, uncontrollable symptoms in real human bodies, and about how the people around you can make those symptoms spread. To understand it, you need to understand where Strasbourg was in 1518. And that means going back about 30 years. The late 1400s were not a good time to be alive in the Holy Roman Empire. The region that is now Alsace, where Strasbourg sits, had been ravaged by disease, famine, and flooding for decades. By 1518, the people of the city were in a state of chronic, grinding desperation. Crops had failed multiple years in a row. Syphilis had swept through the region. A fungal condition called ergotism, caused by a mold that grows on rye grain, had triggered outbreaks of convulsions and hallucinations in nearby towns. On top of this, the Catholic population lived under the constant threat of divine punishment. If you sinned, and in late medieval theology almost everything was a sin, God could curse you. And one of the most feared curses was something called Saint Vitus's curse, named after a Christian martyr. According to popular belief, Saint Vitus could inflict uncontrollable, compulsive dancing on those who had offended God. The people of Strasbourg weren't just afraid of poverty and disease. They were afraid of being made to dance. This is where the historian John Waller, who wrote the most comprehensive modern account of the event, offers the most compelling explanation. Waller argues that Frau Trophäa was almost certainly in the grip of what we now call a stress-induced psychogenic movement disorder. Her body was quite literally enacting the curse she feared most. Modern medicine recognizes this. Psychogenic movement disorders, uncontrollable twitching, jerking, involuntary movement, can be triggered by extreme psychological trauma with no underlying neurological damage. The body produces real involuntary motion because the mind has shorted out under pressure. But here's the part that is harder to explain. How did it spread to 400 people? The answer is something called mass psychogenic illness. It is the phenomenon by which a physical symptom, once witnessed in one person, begins to spread through a group because that group believes, at a deep and often unconscious level, that what they are seeing is real and contagious. The people watching Frau Trophäa did not think she was faking. They believed she had been struck by the curse of St. Vitus, which meant they were all vulnerable, which meant anyone already under severe psychological stress, and in Strasbourg in 1518 that was nearly everyone, had now been handed a mental framework for losing control of their own body. And then the city made it worse. The civic authorities of Strasbourg, following the medical advice of the era, concluded that the only cure for the dancing plague was more dancing. More dancing would exhaust the afflicted and purge the curse. So they hired professional musicians. They cleared a guild hall. They built a wooden stage in the open marketplace. They gathered the dancers and encouraged them to keep going. With the best of intentions, the city of Strasbourg had created a performance space for a collective psychological breakdown. The plague burned itself out by September. The authorities eventually reversed course, banned music, shut down the stage, and sent the remaining dancers to a mountaintop shrine of St. Vitus to pray for relief. The dancing stopped. Whether the recovery came from rest, from the removal of the social permission to continue, or from some underlying shift in the community's collective stress, nobody can say for certain. What we can say is that the dancing plague of 1518 is not as strange or as distant as it sounds. Mass psychogenic illness has been documented hundreds of times in the modern era, in schools, factories, and communities under extreme pressure. The symptoms change, the explanations change. The curse of St. Vitus becomes a mysterious gas leak or a contaminated water supply. But the underlying mechanism, stress, belief, and the social transmission of physical symptoms remains exactly the same. The human body and the human mind are not separate systems. When the mind reaches its limit, the body will find a way to show it. Sometimes it shows it in ways that make no sense at all until you understand exactly what the people around you believed was possible. If this is the kind of story you want more of, the ones that sound impossible until you know the history, subscribe. There's a new video every week, and the next one is the kind of thing that will change how you see something you've taken for granted your entire life.